to the Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Matt Lutovsky, and today we're going to be talking about something that may seem complicated on its surface, but is actually a very simple way of trying to determine for yourself which hitters have been lucky in a given amount of time and which ones are due for some good luck.
Yeah, I mean, batting average on balls in play is something that we talk about a lot in our columns and the fastball post, and it's something that is, I'd say, fairly common now among fantasy circles, but we're kind of taking it to the next step with it and going, month-by-month splits with it, which is something I don't think a lot of people are doing. They're just looking at the overall, and, we can look at month-by-month splits with it, so why not?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you're going to run into, obviously, is the idea that these are very small sample sizes.
Right.
And so when, say, Ty Wigginton or Greg Dobbs is a great example, the guy who's hitting like 360 seemingly for the Marlins, well, he's got a really high batting average on balls in play, meaning that when he puts the ball in play, it's absolutely crazy how many of those hits are actually going for hits instead of getting fielded by the fielders, and thus his batting average gets inflated to a level that his skill probably does not support.
Right, and he will regress. I mean, that's the main thing.
He is Greg Dobbs.
Yeah, he is Greg Dobbs, and we'll talk. He's actually third on this list. He had the highest May batting average on balls in play, but number one on the list is Matt Joyce, who's just insane right now. His .426 batting average on balls in play, and he's walking a lot too, which is also helping his batting average. So he's a guy that, I mean, everyone knows he's not going to keep leading the league in average, but it's tough to to imagine when he is going to slow down, but you need to keep in mind it will happen.
Now, part of the way that you analyze this, at least the way I do it, is I looked at a guy's batting average on balls in play, and that's one big flag, is that Matt Joyce, over the past month, hit .426 on balls that he put into play.
Right.
So .426, league average somewhere around 310, 310-ish, somewhere around there. Anywhere way above that or way below that, you start saying, okay, why is he doing this? Next step I would do is start looking at his line drive percentage, see if they're just bleeders they're getting through, or if he really is hitting the ball on the screws.
Right. Well, and then another thing, too, with batting average on balls in play is you need to look at what a player normally does. Like you mentioned what league average is, and that's great, but for some guys, a guy like Ichiro, for example, he's usually well above that. And that's why it's especially interesting that he was at 227 in May on his batting average on balls in play. I mean, that's going to go way up, and his average as a whole is going to go way up.
Well, how old is Ichiro now? 37-ish?
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, if he's 37-ish, we've been saying now for a couple of years that with Ichiro specifically and players of his type, once you get to that age, as amazing an athlete as he is, if he loses a step, how big of an effect will that have on his ability to actually get on base at that rate?
Right, and that's the thing, you don't know, and we don't know with a lot of these guys some of these things, but we can still say that 227 obviously really low and is going to go up. And I think, some of the other hitters, a guy like Sam Fuld, he had the worst batting average on balls in play in May, and that was at 162. In March and April, he was at 321.
Right.
So we see how these things have a way of evening out. The next guy on the list was Carlos Quentin, who's notoriously low for his batting average on balls in play. He was at 169 in May, 304 in April. We see how that evens out. But then there are other guys who, Hunter Pence, for example, generally high, was high in March and April, was high in May, and eventually that will come down, but so far, so good for him.
Okay, so looking at these lists that we have in front of us, and which I believe you can find inside Fantasy Source, you can sort those yourself. If you're looking at these lists and you're looking at who had the highest batting average on balls in play the past month and the lowest ones, who are you looking at as solid buy low candidates who you maybe work a trade with somebody? Maybe if someone's asking about a guy, you say, no, I'm going to hold on to him. Or if maybe you see a guy who's out there that might be available for free, you say, like, okay, I might take a chance on him at the very back of my lineup.
Well, I think a guy like Adrian Beltre, who's had two pretty bad months for average. Now, he's doing everything else well, homers, RBIs, so his owner might not be willing to trade him, but he's a guy who typically heats up in the second half, and he's had poor months both these months. Certainly Hanley Ramirez, people are already kind of, onto him. A guy I like is Danny Espinosa. He had a 190 batting average on balls in play last month. That's only going to go up. We know he has the power for a second baseman, which is really nice. And, Dan Uggla can't get any worse, we hope.
Well, Espinosa, like that's the kind of guy I would think to myself that he probably got drafted in your league, but he might have been dropped just because he wasn't doing so well.
Right.
And he's so young that he doesn't have quite the track record of everyone else.
Well, what's amazing about him is you look at his stats. He had a 337 ISO, isolated power in May, and a 190 batting average on balls in play. Like, that just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So something's got to give with him.
He's hitting the ball a ton, but they're just not landing on the ground.
Yeah, basically. So he's an interesting one. And for guys that I think, definitely we've seen overachieve, Adam Jones, 409 batting average on balls in play in May, 209 in March and April, 322 for his career. So he's a guy who that average is going to come down.
Right. I think he's hitting somewhere around the 290s now.
Yeah.
And that's more likely to fall down towards the 270s if you can sell high on him. Not necessarily a bad idea.
Yeah, and Freddie Freeman also stood out to me. 403 in May on his batting average on balls in play, and he was at 236 in March and April. So you figure his true talent's somewhere in between. But right now, if his owners are feeling really good about him, or other owners, I should say, are feeling really good about him, he's not at the level he played at in May, at least for average.
Now the thing to remember, of course, with Freeman is that as a young player, you have to kind of bring your own judgment to, is he figuring it out? And this is just a sign of before the lead catches up to him and he regresses a little bit more? Or is this just luck playing itself out?
Right, and I think, he probably is getting better, but he still isn't a 403 batting average on balls in play guy. So that's why he's kind of in that range of a guy you want to be careful with.
Before we wrap up, let me just say it breaks my heart to see Buster Posey on this list.
Well, I think it breaks a lot of people's hearts. So.
Well, Matt, thanks for joining us.
All right.